As someone who uses the Poco F7 Ultra as his daily driver and absolutely loves it, I was curious to see how the Poco F7 would compare and indeed what it actually offers, because it's actually quite different from the Ultra model. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it's available for £389. That'll give you 12GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage. If, however, you want 512GB of internal storage and still 12GB of RAM, you can splash out £429 instead. Now, in this review, you can see if this is actually worth its price tag and, of course, how it compares to some of its key competitors. So let's kick things off and talk about what you got in the box. You've got the phone with a pre-applied screen protector, a SIM ejector tool, a USB Type-C to Type-A cable, and a protective case, which will give you that extra bit of grip and extra bit of confidence when it comes to dropping the phone. However, it's a shame that it hasn't got that see-through design. Very much the same sort of complaints were said when I reviewed the F7 Ultra, because here the regular F7 very much does look the part as well. It's got CNC machined aluminium alloy frame and a glass back. It's available in a classic white, black, or also the cyber silver finish, which in my opinion very much is eye-catching. It almost does look kind of transparent in terms of its design itself, however it isn't. In fact, it's celebrating the collaboration with Qualcomm, and that's why you can actually see the Qualcomm logo at the back of the phone. Now, despite the overall size of the smartphone itself, it weighs in at just 215.7 grams, therefore making it very easy for one-handed operation, of course if you have relatively larger size hands. The phone also has got IP68 rating, which is certainly appreciated, giving it dust and water resistance. Now, at the front of the phone, you have got Corning's Gorilla Glass 7i that is protecting it, which is decent, although not as good as some of the more flagship devices out there on the market. Nonetheless, at this price point, I can't complain all that much. You have also got an optical fingerprint sensor, which is actually pretty fast. No issues whatsoever when it came to utilizing it. You can also pair this up with Face Unlock, although it's worth bearing in mind over here it doesn't retain 3D biometric data, so it's not that secure. So just food for thought. Now here you've also got a pretty large 6.83-inch 120Hz AMOLED display. It supports Dolby Vision and also HDR10+. It has a resolution of 1280 by 2772. Indeed, it actually looks pretty sharp despite its relatively large size. In terms of the overall peak luminance, I recorded 708 nits in sunlight mode, 637 nits in auto mode, and 617 nits in max mode. It does get actually pretty bright, and while it doesn't get as bright as some more expensive alternatives out there, at this price point I've got no complaints. Furthermore, in terms of utilizing it in low light conditions, it has got a minimum brightness of 1.91 nits, therefore making it pretty dim, and has got a pretty impressive 3840Hz PWM dimming. Therefore, it's not going to give you any sort of eye strain in those sort of conditions. So moving on, we get onto its camera performance, and here you've got a main 50MP f1.5 wide lens with OIS, which also offers up to 10x digital zoom. You've also got an 8MP f2.2 ultra wide. Now the latter does struggle in terms of giving you that extra amount of detail, not only in terms of normal lighting conditions but also low light conditions. It just looks a little bit softened, although it is aided with the fact that you can also utilize night mode. Now the normal lens, however, does actually do a pretty good job in normal lighting conditions, and here I felt that in terms of zooming in it was actually also pretty decent. Although it's disappointing over here that in comparison to a lot of the alternatives out there that offer, let's say, 30 to 60 times digital zoom, it is capped at 10 times. And you've also got no sort of AI photography toggle that you can enable or disable. So in other words, over here, the main camera lens does a decent job, although certain individuals might have expected a little bit of better performance. And indeed over here, Xiaomi or indeed Poco could have kind of improved the overall processing of the main lens and also upped the overall ante when it comes to the ultra wide. Now as for the selfie camera, you've got a 20MP f2.2 wide lens. It's actually pretty impressive. The portraits are actually very good, not only in terms of the bokeh effect, which can be edited after taking the photo, which is always very appreciated, but also in terms of the amount of detail and light that it draws in. In low light conditions, it does a decent job, and while it can seem a little bit blurry in certain instances, I still found it to be perfectly acceptable, especially given its overall price point. So what about when it comes to its recording capabilities? Well, at the rear you can shoot 4K and 1080p at 30 and 60 FPS and 720p at 30 FPS. The selfie camera can shoot 1080p at 30 and 60 FPS and 720p at 30 FPS. Yes, it's actually pretty disappointing that you do not have a 4K option for the selfie camera, although the same could be said about the F7 Ultra. Now, in terms of the actual recording capabilities itself, I actually found it to be decent in normal and low light conditions, although it did actually suffer from quite a bit of jitter. Yet again, something that I've experienced in other Poco and Xiaomi phones, and it's quite disappointing that yet again over here on the regular F7 model, that it doesn't exactly give you the best sort of stabilization. Despite the fact that you have got the likes of EIS and even OIS being utilized, the phone does still struggle in comparison to some of the more premium phones out there on the market. Now, where it does keep up, however, is the fact that you have got the pretty powerful Qualcomm Snapdragon 8S Gen 4. I say that at this sort of price point because in comparison to a lot of alternatives out there, this phone actually does trump them. Here you've got an octa-core processor with an Adreno 825 GPU. You've got 12GB of LPDDR5X RAM with UFS 4.1. It's using liquid cooled technology 4.0 with Ice Loop and Wild Boost optimization 4.0, which can be utilized by swiping to the left on your games while you are actually in them. Now in Geekbench 6, I noticed a single core score of 2042 with a multi-core score of 6551. In terms of GFX Bench, I noticed an FPS of 27 up to 258, which is pretty much what you'd expect. And it's actually pretty impressive for the overall price point of what Poco is actually asking for. And therefore means that when it comes to gaming or indeed multitasking, I had no issues whatsoever. Now in terms of the overall software experience, however, it is actually filled with quite a bit of bloatware. The same sort of comments can be said about a lot of Xiaomi and Poco devices, or indeed a lot of the other Chinese manufacturers out there. Despite the phone being shipped out with Android 15 with HyperOS 2, it does actually feel a little bit sluggish at first. But after you uninstall some of the pre-installed apps and customize the settings themselves, it does actually feel pretty good. You've also got a few different AI integrations as well, like AI erase or image expansion among a few others, which can be handy in certain scenarios. And yes, it doesn't quite compete with some of the more flagship devices out there or some of its main competitors, namely, for example, from the likes of Oppo or indeed Motorola. But nonetheless, over here, when it comes to the overall fluidity, well, I've got no sort of complaints. Now, next up, we get on to one of the key selling points of this smartphone. And indeed, over here, we're talking about its battery life. You've got a whopping 6,500 milliamp battery pack, which of course might differ in certain territories, but that's the model that I've actually got and it's the international version. Now in my battery rundown test, I netted an absolutely insane 35 hours and 27 minutes. Not only is that far superior than the Poco F7 Ultra, but it's also far superior than anything that I've actually tested to date. Indeed, it does do a tremendous job, and therefore when it comes to the battery life, you can easily expect to get roughly 2 days of light to medium usage, or 1 to 1.5 days if you're a heavy user. Indeed, this phone is an absolute powerhouse. Furthermore, it's great to see that you have got 90 watts of wired charging capabilities, therefore allowing you to go from roughly 0 to 80% in around half an hour. You've also got 22.5 watts of reverse charging capabilities via USB Type-C ports. Although the only downside over here is that you've got no wireless charging capabilities, be it in terms of normal charging or indeed reverse charging. Now on the subject of things that have been omitted, there is no eSIM functionality, which is quite disappointing. Likewise, the same could be said about the F7 Ultra, which just left me a little bit disheartened when it came to traveling. Therefore I had to grab my second phone. But it does have dual SIM capabilities. It's got Wi-Fi 7, which is certainly impressive at this price point, and Bluetooth 6.0, which supports the major codecs such as aptX and LDAC among a few others. You've also got NFC for contactless payments, which is always appreciated. And furthermore, I actually really do like the dual speakers. Not only do they get pretty loud, but thanks to the fact that you can utilize Dolby Atmos, they actually give you that sort of more immersive sound. And you can also customize the EQ, which is a little bit of an extra cherry on top. So with all that in mind, it brings me on to my verdict for the Poco F7, and here I do think that the manufacturers absolutely nailed it. You have got that large 120Hz AMOLED display, which will feel very fluid, and you've got that insane 6500 milliamp battery pack, which will give you some pretty ridiculous battery life. Indeed, it will very much suffice for multimedia and gaming consumption. Now, the set of features could have been a little bit improved, for example, adding eSIM, but it's good to see, for example, Wi-Fi 7 support. The rear camera configuration could have been a little bit improved in terms of the overall quality, or indeed the fact that zoom levels feel a little bit limited, but will suffice for your average Joe. And in terms of the overall software experience, well, it does feel like you're filled with quite a bit of bloatware when you first install it. As soon as you get rid of some of the pre-installed apps and then disable or indeed enable some of the features that you want, then suddenly you'll have a pretty nice seamless experience. Now, given all of this and its overall price tag of £389 to £429 in the UK and at the time of filming, it's very easy to see myself recommending the F7, and as a result it gets my Best Buy award. I do think it's one of the best phones when it comes to battery life and multimedia consumption out there on the market. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of the phone down in the comment section below and how you feel it compares to some of its key competitors. If you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification. All of which would be greatly appreciated and will allow me to continue delivering honest reviews like this one. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.